I'm really pleased and fortunate to have with me today Dr. Roughgarden. She will be the featured guest scientist speaker at the Bowen Center Spring Conference, April 25th and 26th of this year. The title of the conference is Sexual Diversity in the Human Family from a Bowen theory perspective. Dr. Roughgarden's an American ecologist and evolutionary biologist. She's emeritus professor at Stanford University in the Department of Biology, and additionally, she's an adjunct professor at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. So we're really pleased to have you, Dr. Roughgarden. I was wondering if you might just summarize what you think will be the main points that you want to make during your presentation and interview at the conference.
Well, as you know, there are two presentations, the first of which is primarily about a documentary that has been in the works now for 6-7 years with Drew Denny as the director. And that's really a survey of gender and sexuality in the animal kingdom. And it's the documentary was motivated to begin with by Drew's reading Evolution's Rainbow, which is the book I've written on that topic. Evolution's Rainbow, I might add, has 3 parts to it. The first part is about gender and sexuality in the animal kingdom. The second part is about the development of gender and sexuality, particularly in humans, but also in some other mammals. And the third part is a survey of gender and sexuality expressions in different cultures, including throughout history. And the documentary focuses on the first part of the book, and most people pay attention to that primarily. But in today's political climate, the third part about the diverse expressions of gender and sexuality in different cultures, I think, is particularly relevant. So that would be the first talk, would be just to acquaint people with the diversity of gender and sexuality in the animal kingdom. Now, the second talk would be more theoretical and about the difficulties the biologists are having in accounting for this diversity. And now, at long last, that the facts of this diversity are starting to emerge and be accepted, which they weren't 20 years ago when I wrote Evolution's Rainbow. The approach to explaining that diversity rests on, I guess, what you might consider a theory of the family that focuses on individual interests. And I've juxtaposed, and I refer to this as the sexual selection program. And I've juxtaposed that to what I've termed the social selection program, which is a set of hypotheses, some due to me, but some due to others, which together lead to a different picture of family organization and the objectives, if you will, of participants in sexual reproduction. So the second talk will be juxtaposing the worldviews about implicit in the individualistic account of reproductive social behavior with the more social account that I tend to favor.
Well, I know that I'm very much looking forward to the documentary that you have been working on for these number of years with Drew Denny, and I'm really excited to get to watch part of Second Nature. And I think the facts related to sexual diversity will be so important for people to hear rather than hypotheses or speculations, and then how to draw from those facts related to sexual diversity and extrapolate them to whatever degree is possible, to the human. And the idea of social selection theory versus sexual selection theory, again, I think will be of particular interest to those of us who think family and who think social context and how the reproductive success is a social enterprise and not so much just driven by pure instinct. The what do you believe are your main contributions to the field of science related to sexual diversity?
Well, I think it's premature. I'm certainly not going to be the judge whether I've made important contributions. I mean, that's for others to decide. I've tried in this topic area, I've tried to call attention to the internal contradictions of sexual selection theory, a piece of Darwin's writings. On the whole, 90% of Darwin is perfectly fine, and he's a genius and a great naturalist and so forth. But when it comes to sex and sex roles, it's much more problematic. And I think one of my contributions is to call attention to the difficulties with sexual selection theory, a theory that I might add is widely accepted by evolution and uncritically accepted by evolutionary psychologists. And I wish they'd get away from it. But they seem to think that sexual selection is settled science in biology. And I think one of the purposes of the second lecture I give would be to highlight how it's not settled science, to understand the dynamics of sexual reproduction. And so the other contribution is to develop and organize, if you will, the alternative hypotheses to the sexual selection narrative, which is not only individualistic in its orientation, but relies on concepts of deceit and selfishness and competition. And this is not an ideological, it has ideological overtones to it, but fundamentally it's a question of data. Do the data actually support sexual selection theory? Do female peahens, for example, actually select peacocks on the basis of the good genes they supposedly have as displayed in their tails? Is that actually what they're doing? And so the data on that are very mixed and largely negative. But yet the narrative continues, and so on throughout sexual selection theory. You have these narratives that under examination aren't really supported by the facts, but principally being the existence of a genetic hierarchy, because the whole idea of sexual selection, females choosing males on the basis of checking out those with good genes, rests on the supposition that there are men with bad genes and that there are men with good genes. And if you go into a bar and you look at a bunch of guys there, can you case out which ones have good genes and decide to shack up with him and ignore the others because of their bad genes? The fact of the matter is the guy at the bar might have a big wallet, but that's independent of his genes. And a guy slinking at the corner might have just as good genes as the guy with the big wallet. And so the whole proposition of selecting mates on the basis of genetic quality isn't supported by the facts. And yet this is the underlying narrative in sexual selection theory. And of course, defenders of sexual selection will then say, well, they'll try to tread water and work around it and kind of restate it and so forth. But the whole problem with sexual selection, in my view, begins with its focus on mating rather than on offspring delivery. Natural selection relies on being able to successfully deliver offspring into the next generation. It's the delivery of offspring. And that involves parental care and so forth to begin with. And then you work back from the offspring rearing and the parental care to mate choice. And the mate choice, in my view, is largely about who can help you raise young, not on the genes that those young will have. And so the problem with sexual selection and Darwin's account of it is it begins with mating and ends with delivery of the offspring, whereas it should begin with delivery of the offspring and work backwards to what's necessary to do in order to achieve that.
We know, what would you say, or what do you think that your research in sexual diversity and the findings that you've come to and conclusions that you've come to the degree to which you've come to conclusions from the animal world, how do you think they can be extrapolated to the human and the human family?
Well, the big problem that people in sexuality and gender minorities face is twofold. There are two big problems. One, they're being told they're unnatural, and two, they're being told that they're sinful. And the first of these is refuted by the evidence of natural diversity in gender and sexuality. So you just cannot correctly claim that those sexuality and gender minorities are unnatural, because throughout the animal kingdom, there's a lot of similar behavior. And it's adaptive, and it evolved, and it evolves multiple times in different lineages. And so that's one thing. Now, with respect to sin, and whether or not people who are members of these minority gender and sexuality groups are sinning, that involves actually reading the religious texts on the matter and finding out what the religious texts actually say. And this is rarely done in the fundamentalist denominations, in my view. They get the Bible secondhand and filtered through highly prejudicial and ignorant lenses.
Yeah. Well, I certainly know from a personal standpoint that when I read Evolution's Rainbow 25 years ago and heard the challenge of sexual selection, and then your alternative of social selection, and identifying, diversity as a fact of nature, and being able to witness and see it across different species, really was instrumental in my beginning to think and feel differently about myself, and how I wanted to work towards having that view be represented more frequently and more factually within the human and within other mental health and psychological programs and endeavors of study. So I've been following you for a number of years and your work. I was wondering, how did sexual diversity in the animal world become a research focus for you for so many years?
Oh, well, I kind of laid this out in the preface of Evolution's Rainbow. Turns out I was walking and participating in my first gay pride parade, which was in San Francisco. This was at that time I was living in San Francisco. And actually I wasn't. I was living down on the peninsula. And the BART ran special, which is the Bay Area Transportation Organization, whatever, the outfit that runs the trains and the subways. So they ran a special train up from the peninsula to San Francisco for the Gay Pride Parade, and I rode that up there, and I saw all of these people. I just couldn't believe it. And I'd heard that there was maybe 5% of the population that was gay. That was sort of the number floating around at that time. And 5% of my friends weren't gay, to my knowledge, that's for sure. And then also, with respect to sex change, I knew of a couple species. There's a species here that does it. There might be half a dozen. And so when I saw all these people, I said, for the first time, the figure of 5% was actually plausible. I said, oh my God, there's so many people here. There are much more than 5%. And so that was then a problem because if biologists pathologize same-sex sexuality and gayness in general, Well, they, it's the people that are right. It's the science that's wrong, And so there was a calling then to find out what was actually going on in nature in the primary literature, find out what the numbers were, find out why these people were being pathologized, and then doing something about it. It was really a calling, and similarly, and I thought that that Evolution of Rainbow was going to be just a pamphlet. I thought it would be just 50
Pamphlet,
pages,
a pamphlet.
a pamphlet, with some photos,
Turned out to be more than a pamphlet.
So I thought it was going to be a really, really easy job. And when I got into it, holy mackerel. And, and it was exciting because, as a research scientist, when you're onto something, you get really, really pumped up about it. And I knew I was going into grounds that no one would touch. And so one thing led to another, and it became Evolution's Rainbow. It took a couple years to write, and it stayed exciting throughout. And because again, so much of this information was not synthesized anywhere, was not put together, and it did lead to a worldview. I mean, a whole view of nature, which was much more realistic and more embracing, more inclusive than before. And it's still, Evolution's Rainbow is still selling. It went through a second printing, a sort of a 10-year anniversary edition. It's now 20 years old. Could probably get another one, and I still get royalty checks, not huge ones and so on, but they're definitely there. And most recent translation was into Spanish. And I was in Chile giving a lecture down there in November, and a bunch of people down in Chile had the Spanish edition, which is the first time I actually saw it. And so so it is moving. But on the other hand, there's still a problem with the Academy. So while Evolution's Rainbow is very successful as a book and has done a lot, I think, for bringing diversity to the attention of the general public, the by and large, the behavioral ecologists and the behavioral evolutionists really dig in on sexual selection there. And so I would not suggest that my views on this are anywhere close to being accepted by mainstream evolutionary biologists. It's still a slog. But on the other hand, by writing Evolution's Rainbow, I definitely broadened the audience for the information beyond the Academy. And if anything, the people outside the Academy are sort of moving in on the Academy and demanding that that they start taking this into account.
Well, I'm certainly glad that you went to that Pride Parade so many years ago, and decided to expand the work beyond a pamphlet and touch the information and do the work that produced the book Evolution's Rainbow, and then subsequently the second edition and translation into Spanish. That's remarkable and impactful, I believe. I know in the recent past you've kind of shifted your focus from sexual diversity to the holobiont. So I was wondering how you decided to do that and what's of interest to you in that area of study.
Well, I was in Israel about, I guess maybe 6-7 years ago by now, giving a lecture on actually family dynamics within birds, within a bird's nest, and talking. I was trying to apply the economic theory of the firm to the organization within a bird family, and to see the production by a bird family in terms that economists would use to look at production from a family firm in economics. And that was fine, but afterwards, this guy came up to me, and he was originally a New Yorker, but he was an Israeli, but he still had sort of New York, almost Bronx mannerisms. And he says to me, "What do you got against microbes?" I said, "Well, nothing. I never think about them." And so then he and his wife, so that's Gene Rosenberg and his wife, Helena, and there's a developmental biologist named Scott Gilbert. And we all sat down for lunch, and they wanted mathematical modeling on the role of the microbes. It's called the microbiome, the role of the microbiomes vis-a-vis the host. And they had lots of data that the microbiome contributes a lot to the welfare of the host. And like we, for example, have microbiomes in our stomach and in our mouth and all over the place. And we're not very healthy if we don't have those. And in fact, during the course of embryonic development, you need to have microbes in order for the processes to occur. And there are data that all kinds of structures don't develop if you don't have some microbes around to sort of help along the way. And so the big question to me as an evolutionary biologist was, what explains the evolution of this integration, this cooperation? So I just got really interested in the problem. And meanwhile, I'd been working for about 10, 15 years or so on the sexual diversity and sexual selection and family organization kind of stuff. And I pretty much said what I could say about it. So, and throughout my career, I've kind of been on a topic area for about 10, 15 years and then move on to another one. So the time was ripe, and I got really involved in what I'm now calling theoretical microbiology, which is the theory of microbes and bacteria and viruses and so on, and how they interact. And ecology really hasn't done that. We haven't gone there much. Ecologists tend to focus on nice big things that you can see, not these tiny little things that are in agar dishes and so forth. So I've been working on that, and I've had a grant, fortunately, from the Moore Foundation, and that's been funding page charges and things of that sort. It's hard. It requires new models because we can't just plop existing ecological models onto bacteria and viruses and expect them to work. And so you have to start from scratch. And then when you make the models from scratch, you don't exactly know how the solution's going to go. So you have to work on it. And so it's been very challenging. It certainly keeps me active, which is a good thing.
That's what the research says.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Bowen talked a lot about people. He was talking to people who were learning his theory and what were called the training programs at that point in time, and encouraged people to pick up the idea of research, whether it was research into their own family or research into some aspect of science that interested them, and looking at it through a systems perspective. And you certainly have picked up areas of interest and delved into them and tried. It sounds like you've been learning all that you can and producing lots of good information for people to take advantage of through your research. Are there any last things that you would like to toss into our interview before we wrap up?
Well, just one thing is that before you're getting in touch with me, I was unfamiliar with the Bowen theory, and it to my ears as an ecologist, it has kind of an ecological flavor to it. It's very systemy, and I gather that it's as distinct from Freud. Freud would be an individualist, right?
That's accurate.
Yeah, and so I'm enjoying learning this, and there might be some synergism between the Bowen theory and the kinds of theories that behavioral ecologists are doing vis-a-vis animal families. And at the moment, they're quite distinct. I'm not aware of anybody from the behavioral ecology community who's engaged in, I guess you could say, family dynamic theory or family systems theory.
Yeah,
And
those would be exciting areas to dialogue and converse about the intersectionality between family systems theory and other fields of science. So, gosh, it's hard to believe that the spring conference is almost just 2 months away, and we have the month of March ahead in April, and then we'll be convening in Washington, D.C. So I am kind of like so excited for this conference and to have you be present and participate in it and dialogue with all the Bowen Center and Bowen theorists. So thank you so much.
Okay, well, great. Thanks for getting in touch.
You're welcome.
Right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.